Hey there, future chess masters. Are you ready to embark on an exciting journey into chess? But wait, before we begin, did you know that there's a hidden gem rule of chess that most beginners overlook? Curious? Well, stick around to the end to make sure you can get an edge in your next chess match. Welcome to our ultimate guide for how to play chess, where we'll kickstart your journey to mastery of this timeless game. The goal of the game is to checkmate the opponent's king. Checkmate happens when you have an unstoppable threat of capturing the opponent's king on the very next move. To capture a piece, you move your piece onto the same square as theirs and remove their piece from the board. No two pieces can occupy the same square, and you cannot capture your own pieces. So, what are these pieces, you might ask? The first piece to know is a pawn. Pawns are basically the fence of your position. They establish where your position ends, your opponent's begins, and where there's no man's land. Pawns can move one square vertically, but when they capture, they can only capture diagonally one square. Additionally, on a pawn's first move, it can move two squares up the board. If a pawn can make its way all the way to the end of the board without being captured, it can promote to a queen or any other piece in the game that we will discuss other than a king. The next piece to know is a bishop. Bishops can move any amount of squares diagonally. What this means is that you'll have one light squared bishop and one dark squared bishop to start the game. They can move in any direction diagonally, but only on their color complex. The next piece to know is a rook. Rooks can move vertically or horizontally as many squares as they would like. As you can imagine, rooks and bishops are very powerful when the board is open. The next piece to know is a knight. Knights move a little more complicated because they can actually jump over pieces. Their movement is moving two spaces up, down, left, or right, and then one space to a 90-degree angle of that. So they make an L shape. As I mentioned, knights can jump over pieces, whereas a rook, bishop, pawn cannot do so. They stop when they capture a piece. The next piece to know is the most powerful piece on the board, the queen. Queens are a combination of a rook and a bishop. They can move as many squares as they want, diagonally, vertically, and horizontally. Lastly, the most important piece in the game, but the least powerful, is the king. Kings can move one square in any direction. Kings can never move into a square where the opponent could capture it on their next move. Another way to phrase that is your king cannot move into check. What check means is that an opponent's piece is threatening to capture your king. If you're in check, you have three options. Number one, you can move your king out of check. Number two, you can block the check with a piece of yours. Or number three, you can capture that piece that is checking your king. Additionally, you set up the chessboard, the bottom right-hand corner being a white square. The second row is all pawns, and the first row goes rook, knight, bishop, queen, king, bishop, knight, rook on the white side, and then it is a mirror image position on the black side. You'll notice that queens are on their colored square. Because of how weak the king is and how important it is to attack, castling is a large part of the game. To castle, you move two pieces at the same time, a king and a rook. Castling requires that the king and the rook that you are moving to castle have not moved at all earlier in the game. The pieces between the king and that rook have to have already left to other places in the board. They cannot be between them. If those criteria are met, then you move your king two spaces towards the rook, and the rook appears on the other side of the king. You can do this both to your king side and your queen side. Now for the rule that most beginners miss. Like I mentioned earlier on in the video, pawns can move two squares only on their first move. But if you move your pawn two squares and it lines up next to an opponent's pawn, that opponent can capture your pawn as if you only moved it one square. A caveat to this is en passant must happen immediately after you move two spaces. For instance, they could not make one move and then later on in the game do en passant. It must happen immediately. Now, how does the game end? Well, it could be a draw, which can happen by a variety of means. It could be a draw by agreement, in which case at any point in the game, the two players shake hands and agree to a draw. It could also be a draw by insufficient material. This means that both players only have one knight, one bishop, or no pieces other than the king remaining. That means that there is no checkmate possible. It could be stalemate, in which case there is no legal move for one of the players on their turn. This often happens because of the rule that you cannot move into check. If the position repeats 3 times, threefold repetition, it's an automatic draw. Or if 50 moves have passed since a capture or a pawn move, then it's called a draw. Now, how do you win? Number one, your opponent's clock runs out. If they run out of time, then you win. And of course, if you checkmate your opponent, then you win the game instantly. You can see an example of a common checkmate on the screen now. Thank you for joining and watching my first ever video on YouTube. You can find my latest video on screen now. Feel free to leave a comment below for video recommendations for the future. If you'd like, hit the subscribe button and you can join us on this learning journey together. I'll see you in the next one.